Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Tech Expert, our Digitization and Business Automation Services webinar. Today, we will delve into the topical issue of workplace transformation, focusing on the importance of document management as a key step to digitization. Now, before we start, we just have a few housekeeping matters. Please note that this session is being recorded. The duration of the time for the session is 1 hour, inclusive of our question and answer segment. All dial-in participants will be muted to minimize interruptions. Questions can be submitted in the questions bar to the left of your screen, and you will get access to the slides and the recording of this presentation after we conduct the webinar. Now over to our presenter.
Thank you, Jessica. Good morning, everyone. My name is Anthony McGregor, and today I will be your host and your presenter as we go through this topic here on this webinar. So the first thing I want to gather from you, right, is what is your reality? What is your current reality as it relates to your digitization and business automation process or your journey, right? What do we know? We know that your team is overworked. There's too much manual processes right now, too much physical tasks that needs to be completed. We know that there are field compliance because there are inconsistencies, right? Maintaining the practices to satisfy your governance requirements. We know that there's a loss in your organizational historical evolution because files can't be found. Too much duplicates. We don't know which one is the original. And of course, one of the main effects of not being or digital ready is the degraded customer experience. You know, especially now during the COVID situation here, we know that customers, even though a lot understand, they still expect that kind of instant gratification from us. And having to physically get up and go to your office to look for these files, will become a burdensome nightmare. And of course, your customers are going to experience it immediately, right? And the effect of that, of course, is a level of dissatisfaction. I'm actually interested in knowing what your reality looks like. So I'm actually going to ask Jessica to just send a question out there to the audience. Let me see what type of feedback we get as it relates to your current reality. Let's see how accurate I am where these items are concerned, right? And while you are filling out that poll, this is what I want you to consider for me. I
How
want you
would
to stop.
you
Sorry. I would like you to stop printing. I need you to stop printing. Okay. Now, the funny thing about digitization is like a lot of times, customers may come and say, yes, they want to go down a digitization journey, but yet still they receive files electronically and print them to scan them and then to store them up again, right? The concept of creating your digital workspace, because that is what we're going to call it today. We're going to call it a digital workspace. It's no longer we're going to call it your document management or your EDRMS environment. We're going to call it your digital workspace. The concept of creating your digital workspace requires you to start removing or expiring the whole concept of physical paper or physical documents where necessary, because we know we can't do it for all content, but where you have control internally, I want you to start thinking about stop printing. Okay, the concept of not printing anymore. So we're gonna actually go over those results later on in the presentation, just to see how accurate we are as it relates to the current landscape that you have, where your digitization journey is concerned. But then we want to encourage you and we want to introduce you to what a perfect work could look like, right? What a perfect work could look like when you're creating your digital workspace, because we need to consider, right, the whole change in the working atmosphere, the whole change in the way in which employees now need to engage to be able to do their work effectively and to maintain that level of efficiency that you need. And in order to do that, there are four key things that are required for your perfect world scenario, right? One, how do you collaborate? Okay. How do we create an environment that fosters a level of collaboration, regardless of if it is raw content or creation of documents? How do we do that? How do we encourage and introduce an environment where people can work on content together, right, to achieve that same common goal? Then once we create that content, how do we manage it? What are the compliance requirements that needs to be put in place to make sure that the documents or the content is managed in a way that allows for you to keep the key things that are important to you, like the security trail, the audit trail, right, the versioning, etc., where these documents are concerned. So then how do we manage it? Now, once we can manage, we collaborate, we get the documents in, we can manage it, we have our compliance, our rules and stuff set up inside there. How do we analyze this data? A lot of the times people consider digitization just scanning documents and just having it there. But there's no value in an image, right? There's no value in an image. What's important is the indexing information so that you can actually analyze the content or the OCR exports that allows you to actually get analytical data off of the contents that you are actually ingesting into your system. And then, of course, how do we automate it? Right? We want to take a lot of these manual processes and these manual functions, and we want to create a level of automation to help with your job, help with the approvals, help with the tasks, help with the way in which documents are stored, to take away from that kind of human touch, because we want to limit the amount of human touch where this digital workspace is concerned, so that we get to focus on things that really matters, right? These administrative tasks here are the things that are taking up a lot of our time. So we want to create an environment that we can collaborate, we can manage, we can analyze, and we can automate. And that is what we will consider to be our perfect world scenario, right? Where our digital workspace is concerned. So in this perfect world, right, that we will want, this is our utopia, right? In this perfect world, there are things that we need to consider before we even reach to that world, right? The journey. First, we need to understand the sources of our content, the sources of our documents, right? We have the physical files, right? So those are the files that are coming in, correspondence from external vendors, customers, uh, whoever, right? Even the physical files that we currently, because we are now developing our journey for our digital workspace, right? The current physical files that we are using internally or creating internally now to store for whatever record keeping purposes. Then we have the files that we create electronically through our PCs, right? Those are the documents that you create using the word processing application, like Word and the Excels and the PowerPoints, etc. And then we have the emails that have a mixture of digital content, right? Because some emails have attachments of scanned documents, so what we call digital documents, and then of course the actual electronic content within those emails, right? So we have those there as well as another source or form of getting content and documents over. And then of course we have that age-old fax machine, which is like the most interesting concept, because the document actually starts off physical, right? We scan it, it becomes electronic, and then it comes back out physical, right? Then we print it, and then we file it. So what we're gonna do is that we're gonna consider the fax information as physical files. So we just categorize that as a physical file. So we got like three main sources that we're gonna focus on, right? So the physical files, the PC or the digital or an electronic files that are created, and then of course the files that come within emails. So now that we understand our sources for the documents, now we need to talk about the functions that will allow for us to manage this digital workspace, right? So of course for the physical files, we have to do imaging, right? Imaging is just that process of scanning those documents, right? Now, a lot of things to consider with physical files. Physical files, of course, we're trying to go green, right? So we're trying to go green. So we're trying to save the environment, try to save the trees. But we also need to consider things like health hazards where physical files are concerned. The dust, even the way in which some of these files are actually stored, the boxes overhead, under the desk, right? For scenarios where you don't have a filing room, right? There's a lot to consider where physical file storage is concerned. Even even the cost to store these physical files, right? Because of course it's taking up some level of real estate, right? I actually want to find out from you, what is the cost? What is the cost for actually storing physical files? Have you ever considered that? Have you ever considered what it will cost or what it costs you to actually store these physical files? I have another question. Jessica, if you could just ask that to the audience, I'll be interested to know how and what the cost will look like, or if they have even considered the cost for storing of these physical files. But that's fine because we can now image these files and turn them into digitized documents. Okay, so we're gonna capture it, right? We're gonna put it through a scanner. We're gonna put it into what we call our capture software, and then we're gonna index it, right? So this is another function. So we're gonna image, we're gonna index. Indexing is important because there's nothing that we can do at this point with an image, right? So we need to capture that relevant information off of this image to make the document relevant, okay? And then after we index, of course, then we're gonna ingest it into our system. Good. So now that we understand the sources, we understand the functions that are involved, we need to pay attention now to how we're going to classify our documents. How do we group them together? What are the document types that we work with, right? Is it a invoice? Is it a letter, right? Is it classified with various security levels? Okay, and then what are the document status, right? When is a document active? When is it a record? When do we send it for archive? We need to understand these classifications as broad or as detailed as necessary, so that when we are building our utopia, our digital workspace, that all of these things are considered, so that when we start to ingest documents into the system, we know exactly what it is and what that process will look like. Then, of course, we have the compliance rules. The compliance rules now governs everything. It kind of the glue that gels everything together, right? What is the security requirements, right? Where do they store? How long do we keep them? These rules are the rules that actually allow us to govern how the documents are handled, where they are stored, who has access to it, what happens to them after a particular period of time, right? So these are the four core or main concepts I just want to touch on today, as it relates to your document handling. Because document handling and having a good understanding as to how you're going to handle your files is also important as you go along your journey of creating your digital workspace. So now let's take a look at your landscape. What does your landscape look like? Okay. How do you define your documents? Any document that is entering or leaving your organization is either because there's a decision that needs to be made or requested, right? So somebody's sending some sort of correspondence for you to either make a decision on, whether it's for payment, right? Whether it's an approval, or you're sending a piece of correspondence out for the same, right? Or is it a piece of communication that is coming in? Maybe something that you need to know, maybe something that you need to share. So we will just classify it, and we'll just classify them as two main types of documents, right? So we just said it's either a decision that needs to be made or a communication that needs to be sent or received. So now that we've been able to identify, okay, well, it's either a decision or a communication, right? Then we need to be able to say, okay, well, these are the types of documents that will fall under these particular type of categories. Okay, so at this point in time now we are building our case, our roadmap to creating our digital workspace. So now we are actually saying, okay, well, good. So we have two types of documents that we're working with. Is either one for decision or is one for communication. So then now after we categorize, we index, we search, these are things that now we have to apply to these documents right? So that we will know how, or we'll be able to better use them as they go into whatever document management system that you're using, right? Having a good understanding of to the type of documents allows you to do that. So once you do the groundwork and the framework is developed around the documents that you're handling, then you will know how to categorize it. If you look at the invoice here, for instance, what information off of this invoice is relevant for me? Is it the customer name? Is it the bill to? Is it the ship to? Is it the invoice number? Is it the total? Are these the components on this invoice document that I need to index so that when the user now goes onto the system, that they know exactly what they're looking at without having to open the file? Okay. And of course, now that you've indexed it, now it makes it easier for users to search. Of course, once you're authorized to do so, because now I can search for this invoice based on the ship to, or the total, or the invoice number. So it is very critical for you to know, one, what type of document it is. It's an invoice. Two, what fields am I indexing? So we want the invoice number, we want the ship to, we want the total. And because now we know that, we know what we can search by: the invoice number, the ship to, the total. Okay. And then, of course, the compliance that happens after. So now that this document is in your system, how long do we keep it for? Who's authorized to see it, right? Is it going to be automatically declared as a record? Okay. What are those compliance requirements now that we will apply to this document after we add it into the system? So good. So we've just spoken a little bit about your landscape. Let's talk about the actual digitization process. So when we would have started off the conversation, we would have spoken about the way in which the documents actually come in, right? The sources. So we had the physical, we had the emails, we had the ones from your PC. So this illustration here basically depicts that. So of course, documents coming in from the scanner type technology, right? Are those physical files that come in. So those files, those invoices that come in from your vendors or what have you, that memo that comes in from another agency, those files now needs to be digitized, right? So just because you as your organization may have developed your digital workspace doesn't mean that organization X is there as yet. All right. So you still need to take into consideration where everyone is on their journey, right? So we're gonna scan. We're gonna scan. So what's important about the scanner is that you have a scanner that allows good quality imaging, right? That's very important because you want to make sure that at the end of the day, what is being scanned is readable, not just by the system, but also by the user who has to access that document after. So once it goes in the scanner, and this part here is what a lot of our customers miss, right? The most important piece is this capture software. Okay, so in this scenario, I'm showing you the Fujitsu paper stream capture software. And what this does, this basically allows for you to handle your intelligent capture by doing the OCR capture, right? Whether it's zonal, so we can actually, once of course we're using templates and that kind of stuff, we can actually tell the system, okay, this is where I want you to find this information. This is where I want you to find invoice number. This is where I want you to find billing number. Okay, so then we could tell the system, okay, good, capture it from this location. Then we have the option here for form detection. Okay, so when the form is being scanned, the system automatically picks up, oh, this is a form. Are these the fields that you want to capture? And then, of course, batch separation, because nothing is as painstaking as standing up at a scanner and scanning one document at a time and then having to separate it. Okay, so these are kind of like the core things that you want to ensure that you have when you are doing capture. Of course, there are a lot of other features that these software will come with, but it's important that at minimum that you have this type of functionality to support your scanning process or your imaging process. So that is one way to do it. So we just scan the documents, we put it in the capture software, and then the capture software automatically routes it now into the final repository for us, right? Into your EDRMS or your enterprise document management system. Okay. Then we have the options here now where we can actually receive documents or content from emails, or of course, they're electronically created at a user's desktop or laptop. So what happens here? Because it's the same process that we want. We want to make sure that when this content comes in, right, that we also capture the same type of indexing requirements, right? We want to make sure that emails are routed to the correct folder. We want to make sure that we can detect content. And the good thing is that there's technology out there now that uses artificial intelligence to do this. So the same process that we would have done with the scanner, we can do that with digital documents sent to you with emails. There's technology out there that can do that. Okay, that makes it very easy for you to actually apply those same principles to emails. Okay, as well as documents from your created on your PC. So good. So those items come into the system. Of course, they're routed, and then of course they go into their final resting place. So now that the files are active, right? Because remember earlier we would have spoken about the different statuses of a file, right, or a document. So we could have it as active, we can have it as a record, we can have it as archive, and of course you are free to decide the different status options that you want to give to your files, right? But these are like the three basic ones here. So what you're looking at here, so the files just came in, we scanned them in or we received them via email or we uploaded it into our system, and now it goes into the repository. Okay, what's important is the way in which you store your files, of course, naming conventions and whatever your file plans are. It is very important that how it is structured. It allows for a good end user experience. Okay, now once the files are inside here, users can then securely search for it. Now, why is search possible? Because now we would have done the indexing. So now we have criteria by which users can search by. Okay, so now we have created a digital workspace where users not only get to collaborate and upload documents, but they can search for content that is relevant, right? Because we've created systems and governance inside there that would dictate how files are saved and uploaded that would allow for that seamless type experience. Now, you want to automate as much as possible. And that's what this here represents here, where my mouse is over and over. This is what you want to do. You want to automate as much as possible. So where possible, where you can automate your files or your documents, moving from one status to the next, that is what you want to do. So of course, unless you have what we call a retention schedule that determines when an active file is no longer active and then puts it into a repository for or converts it or declares it a record, right? The only other person who will know when a document is no longer active and is a record is the document owner. So we will have systems in place that will constantly check to see if documents are being declared as records so that they can move through their life cycle. Okay, because we need to maintain that life cycle of the document, whether it is that it's a life cycle or whether it is a continuum, because we know that not all files actually have a start and an end period where their journey is concerned. So now that we have declared these files as a record, of course, we're going to retain them, whatever your compliance requirements will be, right? But then remember, we would have started this journey where some of the files would have come physical, some of the files would have come digital or electronic. So because or unless legislation changes where book of records doesn't necessarily have to be a physical file, right? We still need to take into consideration how we treat the physical files. Okay, so the same policies and same governance that you will use where the electronic files are concerned, of course, you would apply that to the physical files as well. So after they are being retained, right, where it comes to disposition, where the ending of the life cycle is concerned, you will decide, okay, well, we will move these files and put them on a drive, right? Or we may move these files and carry these physical files and carry it into a warehouse. Okay. So not all files will have a start and end, so maybe it's a continuum and it just recycles back into the system. Or maybe you decide to just dispose these files altogether, right? Either way, you need to ensure that the system that you have allows for you to do these or have these capabilities. Okay. Compliance. Now, what does your compliance receipt look like, right? Or have you ever even considered to put your compliance in a RACI format to make it easy for you to break down the responsibilities where this is concerned? Okay, so we do this. So we sit down with you and we try to understand, okay, who's responsible for this information, this data? Of course, you are. Okay, the end user is, right? Because they're the creators of the data. Who's accountable? You have your audit departments, you have the compliance departments, and in some instances, you may have an entire records department. They are accountable. Who needs to be consulted? The leaders of the organization. They need to be on board. They need to be on board with the whole concept of your digital workspace. They need to be champions. They need to provide feedback where this is concerned. And of course, everyone needs to be informed. Okay? It's not a secret. In order for you to be able to maintain and keep your compliance, everybody must be on the same page. The system must be developed to help mitigate some of the risks where end users are concerned. But it's important that everyone understands why they're doing what they're doing. So, what are some of the things that you need to consider? What does the security landscape look like? Okay. How do we secure our files? How do we secure our documents? Who has access to what? Right? What indexing information is required. So we would have spoken about, when we scan the stuff in, especially with the invoice, what information we actually want to pull off of the invoice, right? We have that. How long do we want to retain the information for or the files for? Okay. What does that look like? What are those schedules like, right? Are those schedules governed by internal? Are they governed by the judiciary, right? Are they governed by the regulators? Okay. And as I ask that, I actually want to know how much of you are regulated. Jessica, if you could just send a poll out for me as well, and just to find out how much of our audience come from regulated type industries, that would be great to know. Okay. How do you actually dispose the files? How do you dispose of them? Okay. Because you set up in a system where it automatically disposes it, the electronic file or the digital file. Is anyone taking into account the actual physical file so that you remain in compliance, or vice versa? Okay, how do you do that? Where are your files currently stored? Okay, how are the files accessed? Okay, can someone just go and click and find it? Right? Is there some level of user-based permissions that is required for users to access files based on classifications like confidential, general files, etc., etc.? Okay, as I said, what do we do with the physical files? And of course, right, the one for the century is how do you manage emails, right? Emails form part of your records and must always be considered when you are thinking or talking or going along the journey of developing your digital workspace. Okay, so what's my takeaway? My takeaway is to consider your end user. At the end of the day, none of this matters if the users aren't using it. You don't want to create a system where it becomes very complicated, time consuming, right? Just for the name of calling it digital. Okay. You want to create as much as automation as we would have listed it there in our perfect world example, collaboration, analytics, okay, and of course management as possible, right? To make sure at the end of the day that the end users are comfortable with the system, right, and they are meeting the compliance requirements that you would have set up for your governance. All right. So at this time, I actually want to give you an idea as to what that actual perfect world will look like. And I want to actually hand it over to Chanel Bovell so that she could just give you a quick demonstration as to how we interpret the perfect world, and not just to say that we could talk a good talk, but we could actually show you what that experience will look like. So I'm just going to pass it over to you, Chanel.
Thank you, Anthony. So, in our interpretation of the perfect world, we're going to recreate a scenario for you whereby someone would send an invoice into the company. Of course, our platform ensures that we have some level of collaboration here as well and business automation with a little dash of analytics. All right, so this is a sample of our platform. We, of course, are using SharePoint 2019 in this scenario. And in our scenario whereby someone sends an invoice, this invoice is going to come via an email. So you'll see here that I sent an invoice with an email with some information, and we have the name of the company, who it's billed to, the due amount, the subtotal amount, whatever discounts were applied. And this is information that we really want to capture without an employee having to sit down and enter this data manually. So within our SharePoint environment, I'm going to go to invoices. I send the email to SharePoint, and I send the email to an email address, and via workflow, we were able to capture the contents of that email account, of that email address. So you'll see here that I have my ACME invoice. You'll also see that it was able to capture the company name, the address, the country that it was from, the name of the person who sent it, the date it was received, a lot of beautiful information that I didn't have to sit down and enter this information myself. So it makes it really easy on me, the employee, right? And because this data is captured in different fields, we could create really snazzy reports from it. Right? Another aspect of this workflow automation is that not only was I able to capture this information, I'm also able to ask for someone to approve this invoice. So I'm just going to click here, approve. You'll notice here that this invoice is still pending approval. So I'm going to say yes, submit. This approval is a process that could be built into any of the processes that we would do at Fujitsu. So example, in this case, an invoice is sent in, we want that invoice to be approved. And you'll notice here in my screen, from the time that I approve that email, you'll see that the content, the approval button changed from pending review to approved. Now, the best part is I could now use this information from my invoice to create really nice reports. So I'm going to go to finance. And inside of finance, I now have access to my report. So you'll see my report is loading data. And directly from my SharePoint list, I'm able to pull information about the invoices without having to go and sit down and manually key in that information. I could view my report without any, this report updates automatically in real time when the invoice data is updated in the invoice document library. So this is just a splash of how we could bring your perfect world into real life, using tools such as SharePoint, the paper stream, and workflows that we could build into your environment. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand back over to Anthony now.
Thank you, Chanel. All right. So at this time, I would like to gather from the audience any questions that you may have as to what it is that we would have discussed this morning.
Okay, Anthony, our first question is, what are the cost components of setting up a digital workspace?
Thanks, Jessica. That's actually a good question. So what are the cost components? So things that we need to consider will of course be when we're talking about converting paper to data, we need to consider the actual digitization component. Okay, that process for actually scanning the documents, right? That is the first thing that you need to consider. Okay. The next thing that you need to consider, of course, are the tools, the hardware and software tools as it relates to the imaging process, right? So scanners and the capture technology. So you need to consider that as well. Then you need to consider the consulting around your frameworks, where you fall, where compliance is concerned. You need to consider that, and then most importantly, you need to consider your document management platform. All right. So those are the main items that you will look for when you're considering the cost for one of these systems.
Okay, the second question is, what is the best approach for implementing a solution like this?
Okay. I think the best approach will be to break it down into those four main pillars that we would have identified, right? So how do you collaborate, right? How do you want to collaborate? How do you want to manage your documents or your content? Okay. What is it that you would like to perform analytics on? And of course, what type of automation or how much automation you will want to consider in this system. All right. But even before you reach to those things or during the thought process where that is concerned, you still need to consider things like, the document handling, right? The different types of that we would have mentioned in terms of the different ways in which you receive files, the different ways in which the different categories or statuses of the files, right? Active, content types, etc., etc. So once you have a feel for that, or at least an idea as to what that roadmap is or what it will look like, I think you are well on your journey for creating your digital workspace.
All right. There are no more questions, but we do have a poll for our attendees. Please let us know if you would like to book a follow-up one-on-one session. All right, thank you for your responses. I just want to thank everyone for coming out today. Thank you so much, Anthony, for this absolutely informative session. Everyone, thank you so much for coming out. At the end of, when you're clicking out of our session, there will be a survey for you to complete. Please complete that and we will be in touch with you. Enjoy the rest of your day.